In case you don't know, I'm Reverend Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center. And before I get officially started this morning, last week Larry let us know that he had put his father in hospice. So I need to let you know that his father did pass away a few days after. So I've put some paper out on the tables out there so we can write our condolences, and I'll collect those and put them in a card to give to Larry. Well, each month we take a topic and we address that topic. So this month we are moving into love as security, peace and prosperity for all. And just like last month's topic, which was about love expressing as safety, there's a lot of inner work that needs to take place for security to be realized and manifested externally. That peace that we want to experience also starts inward and works its way out into the world around us. And that prosperity that we want to experience also starts in our thinking, our prosperous thinking, and then we see it manifest in the world around us. Well, last month, Larry wrapped us up by sharing about that love expressing as safety. And what he did was give us some ideas that were counter to, or possibly seen as in addition to, some thoughts that Peggy had given the week prior. And so what I know is that each one of them touched some people and made others squirm. That they were able to make some people feel validated and others inspired, and others were like, hey, you're talking about what I believe. And so one of the things that I find absolutely fabulous about having a multitude of speakers here addressing one topic is that we don't just get one point of view. We're not a philosophy or a teaching that says whoever's standing up here knows it 100% and you all better swallow it hook, line, and sinker. That's not what we teach. We're about expanding who we are and allowing us to have exposure to different ways of thinking. I've often heard people say that they like coming to this center because they find like-minded people. And yet what I know, because I know many of you personally, is that we don't all think alike. We don't express spirit in the same way. And we're not fed and inspired by the same things. So in that way, we're not like-minded. But we are like-minded in that we are all thinkers. We are a community of thinkers. And as a community of thinkers, we recognize that the one expresses as many. It has a lot of different ways of showing up. And we honor how God expresses in and through each individualized expression of spirit. We are a community of thinkers, and we know that in order to change our lives, we have to change our thinking. And so what I believe then is that anyone who challenges our thinking, anyone who gives us a different way of looking at something, anyone who causes us to stretch is giving us a gift. They're bringing about that ability to look at where we are and see if we might want to change or if we like where we are and we want to keep what we already have. So that being said, I'm hoping this morning to help you all stretch a little. Some of what I say might be seen as controversial, not me. But I want to start off by us using our imagination. And for some of you, this is going to be more real than it is imagination, because for me, it's definitely real. But imagine that you wanted to lose a little bit of weight. Imagine that you wanted to change how you eat. And so imagine that you gave up sugar. And that you gave up a lot of carbs and you decided to start eating a low-carb diet. And your goal is to feel healthier, to feel better inside, and you're confident that you're going to be able to stick to this plan. So when you go to the store and you're walking up and down the aisles, all of a sudden you think, oh, I'd better buy that sack of flour and that bag of white sugar and brown sugar and those Ghirardelli chocolate chips, because I just might need to make those chocolate chip cookies that I do every Christmas for my family. So just in case I decide I need those things, I'm going to buy those. Oh, and a bunch of butter. I'm going to take it all home and put it in my pantry and the butter in the freezer, and I'm going to keep it there just in case I decide I need to have those chocolate chip cookies. And that's true. I used to make chocolate chip cookies every Christmas for my family. But does that make any sense? How likely is it that if I put those things in my pantry, I'm not going to touch them or never use them or not sneak a few chocolate chips on the side? So here's the part that might be seen as controversial or Pollyanna-ish is what I've been called, or maybe just plain stupid, or maybe just far-fetched. But I ask you to just hear me out. We say we want peace. We say we're working on creating peace in our lives and in the world around us. And yet what are we stockpiling? What are we putting aside just in case? And I'm not just talking about the military. Does anyone here, like me, have a stockpile of wrongdoings lined up in their mind that they can just launch at that one person if they need to prove that they're right or prove their point? Anybody else keep that stockpile? There's a few hands. So don't get me wrong. I am very grateful to all those who have served in the military, because the world as we know it today has been finding its level of peace and security through the militaries that are in the different countries. They're doing the best they can to keep that level of peace and security. But what I'm thinking is that that's kind of like we're still putting those chocolate chips and sugar in the closet just in case. And so, what would it take to shift in our thinking so we could shift in what it is that we're stockpiling? In the October Science of Mind magazine, Ernest Holmes wrote this. And the October magazine is always dedicated to Ernest Holmes, and paragraphs are from different writings or talks that he's given. And he says, "The universe comes fresh, new, clean, beautiful, lovely, exuberant, exhilarant," and that's in quotes, he might have made that up, "majestic, dynamic, omnipotent to each one of us every moment of our time. That which is the original creative energy and force and intelligence. That which is alive with life and aflame with love. Right at the point of our listening, right at the point of our hearing. Eyes have they, but they see not. Ears have they, but they hear not. Tongues have they, but they speak no language of infinite harmony and peace." Now, this is the way it is. We didn't make it this way, but thank God that it is the way that it is. And thank God that each one of us has access to the infinite and ineffable all. We have to believe this. Someone may say, "I can't believe it." Then I'm sorry. I wish you could. I think it is true. Some may say, "It's ridiculous." Well, I'm sorry you think it's ridiculous. I wish you thought it was as simple as planting sunflower seeds and getting sunflowers. Did you ever hear of a creative soil that when you planted sunflower seeds will give you potatoes? That was Ernest Holmes. So once again, as we think about a world where we're looking at how it is that love expresses as our security, what is it that we're planting? What ideas are we holding? How is it that we're moving forward? And so right now, it might be hard to imagine, it is at least for me, that we can have a world without wars. But until we can imagine it, it's not going to change. It's not going to happen. And so we are thinking people, and we change our thinking in order to change what shows up in our lives. So far, war and the preparation for it and the ability to respond should we need to has been our security. And I believe that's true on a personal level as well as on a national level. If you think about how much we prepare in our mind for those warring conversations. In this month's Science of Mind magazine, there's an article about Jane Goodall in here called Hope Uninterrupted. And she has a book called Reason for Hope. And if you haven't read it, I suggest reading it. It's an excellent book. And in that she says, one real reason for hope is that the people of the world are uniting everywhere to speak out strongly, but for the most part peacefully, against war. We need more people to swell the ranks. We must remember, each and every one of us, that our voices and our actions make a difference every day. And she adds, if we make a valiant effort to protect what is left and work desperately to restore some of that which has been destroyed, then when peace comes, as it will, we shall be ready for it. We can never live in harmony with each other unless we can live in harmony with nature. Now, there's a lot in that, but the part that I really was struck by is that she said, when peace comes, as it will, we shall be ready for it. Right there is a shift in thinking. It wasn't if. If we're able to create it someday, it was when peace comes, as it will, we shall be ready for it. So will we be ready for it? Are we ready for it? Again, what are we storing up in the storehouse? Ernest Holmes said, only peace begets peace. So how might we then change our thinking in our lives so that we can create that change of what we experience in the world around us to increase the levels of peace as security, love as security, and prosperity and peace for everyone? Last week, Larry read a verse from the Bible from Matthew 19:20. And in that, he shared that story, the metaphor that ended with, and again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. And 2 weeks ago, prior to that talk, Edwene Gaines was here. And she was talking to us about prosperity and how it is we can bring about greater prosperity in our lives. And she said, we can do more good for the world the more firmly we are rooted in and experience our prosperity. So those two phrases could seem contradictory. And yet again, I'm going to reiterate that we are thinking people, that we can take both of those concepts into our contemplation, into our meditation, and as we do that, we can find the truth in both of those statements. I was reminded of that, first of all, by, I don't know if you've seen this book before, called Learn to Live, Irvin Seal, I believe is how you say the last name, a New Thought Interpretation of the Parables. And I just happened to be reading this and came across the very same parable that Larry addressed last week. And this is how he interprets it in here. You have to give up what you now hold in exchange for what you want. The kingdom of heaven is a new mind, and it can be established by turning over the old kind of mind, or the old way of thinking. He then says that one has to sell his false knowledge in order to have enough psychic money to buy the good knowledge. And the good knowledge is the knowledge of the law of mind and how it works. Then he reiterates that phrase again, saying that, how hardly shall they that have riches enter into the kingdom of God. And he interprets it as saying the person who is rich in houses and land and stocks and bonds and all that is probably not necessarily the rich person they're talking about here. A person is not necessarily evil because he is rich, nor good because he is poor. The riches spoken of here are the false beliefs and erroneous opinions of the human mind. And he concludes that the mind gets rich in its knowledge of disease and warfare, of failure and of suffering. Rich in the knowledge of many things that are not true. Such a rich man cannot enter heaven. And the way that was described too is, how do I get into heaven? How do I experience happiness now? Remember, Larry said that the way it was interpreted, you could see he was referring to right now I'm not experiencing that. So in order to do that, we own and possess and experience only that which we value most. The pearl of great price is the awareness of one power and one cause in the midst of all the phenomena. The perception of this causes the mind to sell all of its other points of views and buy this one as the supreme learning of the mind. For me, what was most important in this is that idea that we want to divest those thoughts, those erroneous beliefs that are no longer serving us. So we could say, I've had more than enough of that, and just release it. We're ready to let it go. Clear the storehouse of our mind. Clear out the pantry of that which we've had more than enough of, and we're ready to release and let it go. We can make room for the new. Edwene Gaines reminded us that in order to experience our flow, she had 4 things that we need to do. Tithe 10% back to where we get our spiritual food. Forgive everyone all the time. Clear out what we don't want, so there's that clearing out, whether it's thinking or things. And figure out what our purpose is and get on with that purpose. So as she reminded us of those things, I thought, okay, I'm doing pretty good with most of those, but the forgiveness one is actually what stood out to me. Because she said, practice forgiveness daily, and I realized I wasn't doing that. And so I found that to be more the challenge than any of the others at this point. She said, forgive anyone that we've put outside of our heart. And I took that to mean anyone that I'm having a hard time loving. My heart is where I see that love taking place. So if I put them outside of that, they're out of the range of my ability to love them. She and I both agreed that it's anyone who isn't doing things the way we want them to. And anyone from whom I am withholding my love. And again, it made sense in light of looking at love expressing as our security, that the more that we love, the more that we will have that peace and prosperity that will create that security. So it makes sense then to increase the amount of love that I'm able to express. And forgiveness is one of those ways to then bring people from out of my heart back in to where I can love them. So I went ahead and made a new list. I made a list of all those people that I had placed outside my heart. And then I said, I forgive everybody on my list. But the next time I encountered that situation or that person, that anger and that frustration and that resentment was still there. And I have been told that when we forgive, we get unhooked from the person or the situation. So obviously making the list and saying, I forgive so-and-so wasn't enough. It didn't do it for me. And so I had to think about that's been my question all along. How do we forgive? I get the importance of forgiving, but what do we do? Forgive. To forgive is a verb, which means there's some action in there, and I have been missing or trying to figure out what that action was. So as I contemplated that, since Edwene Gaines brought that back up, all of a sudden I went, change our thinking to change our lives. I have to tell a different story. I have to think differently. She talks about persons, places, and institutions that we've placed outside our heart or that we need to forgive. And so I need to tell a different story about the people, the places, and institutions that I've placed outside my heart. And I had a perfect reminder. Again, I'm going to push this month's Science of Mind magazine because everything in here I just found really spoke to me. We've got them in the bookstore if you don't already get them. But in here is a story by Reverend Kathleen Lenever, and it's under Practical Prosperity. And she talks about how when she came into New Thought, she had the challenge of unlearning as she was learning. And I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about shifting some of that thinking, is we're unlearning some things and we're learning other things. And she said, when your mom said no to your wanting some expensive thing with the iconic money doesn't grow on trees, did anybody hear that? Yes. You could have learned economic constriction, essentially not letting economics of money flow in your life. She also said, your mom's message, money doesn't grow on trees, could have taught you discernment and wise goal setting. And those would be lessons that you wouldn't want to unlearn. Or, mom's frugality in making money work may have taught you wisdom and responsibility rather than stinginess and withholding. It's your choice regarding the lessons learned. And so that showed me that sometimes when we have things that we've picked up or that we've learned, we can go into, I'm blaming mom for my poverty because she taught me money doesn't grow on trees. Or I can change the story. And I can look at the story as I've been taught discernment and wise goal setting. Or I've been taught how to make my money work for me through wisdom and responsibility. And as I change the story, I can move into gratitude, and forgiveness just happens. It just falls into place. And I think that can work in a lot of different areas. Sometimes we might resist that idea, but if we just change the story about that person, place, or institution, we can move ourselves into a place of bringing them back into our heart, where we can at least incorporate them in that field of love that we want to bring more of into the world. We change the story from, I'm no longer a victim. No one's done me wrong. We get rid of the old arsenal of little things that we're remembering to launch at people. We just let that go. We shift the stories that we're holding onto in our minds. And we just allow ourselves to make those transitions. And as we do that then, as we bring people back into our hearts, we start to deepen in our awareness of our oneness. We deepen in our understanding that we really all belong. We all belong together. We all belong one with each other. We all belong on this planet. And I see belonging as another way that we experience love as security. Often if we don't feel loved, we don't feel like we belong. And when we feel loved, we feel like we belong. So I don't know how many of you have noticed the mural that's leaning up against the wall over here. Did everybody see that? That mural is entitled You Belong. It's a joint effort between two Border Servant Corps communities, the Doña Ana Communities United and Beloved. The woman from Beloved is who came and spoke to me. And Beloved is a community project that is endeavoring to build inclusive community with young adults that have intellectual and developmental disabilities through relationship, shared experience, the discovery of gifts, and civic engagement within the broader community. Their goal is to allow people who would normally be marginalized from community to find a way to belong. And so this was an inspiration. You can read more about it on the little sign down there next to it of who came up with the idea. But the community members in Beloved helped to paint that and create that mural, and they're sharing it around the community. It was at St. Paul's last month, it's here this month, and it's going to move somewhere else next month. Their goal is to ask people in the congregations where they're posting this or putting it up to consider what makes you feel like you belong. What does belonging mean to you? And we'll be looking at ways that we can incorporate the Beloved community into some of the events that we do. They're looking forward to maybe dancing with us at our birthday party. So we're just thinking about ways that we can create that belonging. And so as I was thinking about belonging and thinking about this talk, one of the things I realized that the military does really well is create a sense of belonging. When you serve together in that way, you develop a tight-knit sense of belonging, not only to whatever group you're in, but to the country that you're serving. And so I think we need to look at how we can build on that ability to create belonging as we imagine and manifest a world that is at peace. How can we bring that about and take the good things that we can see that are out there and build off of them? Again, I'm reading to you out of Spirituality and Health. This is another magazine that I love. This is the September-October edition for this month. And in this is an article called Why and How to Let Go of Fear. The simple step is to understand the basic patterns driving our evolution. The person who wrote this is Bruce Lipton, and he has a PhD. And this is what he says. The biological imperative is directing people to discover how to become more secure. And that's what we're looking at. How are we seeing and experiencing security? And the fundamental resolution to that quest is to form community. it is important to understand that this drive to be in community is not just an expression of our biological imperative, it is also our evolutionary imperative. Our consciousness is driving us to assemble and survive through the creation and support of a global community. So again, how do we develop those communities and develop that sense of belonging? He has some do's and don'ts called the do's and don'ts of evolution because you are an energetic field or an energy field. Do not try to change other people. If you do, it doesn't work. We know that. Do instead focus on yourself and finding like-minded people to create a community in which all your energies are enhanced. Now, I talked about whether we're like-minded or not. And I do believe that we do come together because we want to see all of our energies enhanced. We want to see the highest and best for everyone who comes into the center and to our community. He says, do not try to change the system. If you charge in with your wonderful energy to try and change it, your energy will be canceled. You will come out with your tail between your legs asking, what the hell was that all about? He says, do put your energy into constructing a new system. If you build a better system, people in the old one will gravitate to the new one. And that's a lot like Ernest Holmes saying, stand for something and against nothing. If we put our energy into what it is we can envision, what it is we want to see, that's the direction that we'll be able to move. He says, don't spend your life protesting. Your life is energy. Too much protesting will cost you your life because the system is not going to feed the energy you need for your protests. But do find out who's protesting with you, gather them together, step outside of the system, use your energy for construction rather than destruction, and find other communities that are compatible. This constructive interference with he's calling that constructive interference, when energies come together and multiply each other. So there is, again, a stretch in our thinking, and possibly for some of us in terms of how it is we've looked at creating that world that works for everyone. We want to bring about peace, but how are we doing it? What are we focusing on, and what are we putting in the storehouses of our minds? How are we able to visualize the direction that we want to go? We've often heard it said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Anybody hear that? Well, it's a lie. That's part of our race consciousness, but that's like saying, I can't change my thinking, so I can't change my life. I'm stuck. And that's a sad place to be. And what we know, and the good news, is that we can retrain our brains. We can learn new tricks. We can change our thinking, and we can change our lives. And so another fun book that I want to share with you all, I had so many things this month I was so excited about. Jean Houston wrote this book called The Wizard of Us, Transformational Lessons from Oz. This is a lot of fun. She takes the story of the Wizard of Oz and applies it to each one of us in our personal hero's journey that we're going through in life. And each one of the characters in the Wizard of Oz story is a part of us and our transformational process. They have something to teach us. And so I've been going through, she's got little exercises to do in addition to a lot of information that she puts in here. And so I think you might be able to remember the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz. And he was hanging out in that field, and he couldn't even scare the crows away, and he was stuck. He was being laughed at by the crows. He wasn't doing what he felt like he needed to be doing. And he said he could get unstuck if he only had a brain. So in the section that she talks about in here that's dedicated to the Scarecrow, she talks about what's being realized in brain science and what we're learning about how the brain works. And that's where she said that this idea of teaching an old dog new tricks is really a lie, that we can do that. She says neuroscientists now have proof through medical MRIs that the brain actually becomes built up in people who have regular meditation or contemplative practices. So that gives us even more reason to practice the way that we are learning to practice. She also quotes Rick Hansen, who is a neuropsychologist, and this is what he says: "The mind takes the shape of whatever it rests upon," or more exactly, the brain takes the shape of whatever the mind rests upon. So if you regularly rest your mind on regrets, resentments, quarrels with others, self-reproach, you know that voice in the back of your head that's yammering about what nobody really knows about you and who you really are and all that stuff. If you rest your mind there, it will change your brain into that direction. Because neurons that fire together wire together, for better or for worse. And I love that phrase. Neurons that fire together wire together. We're actually creating physical stuff going on in our brains, depending on what we rest our mind on. Jean Houston continues with, "This means that we could absolutely engage in self-directed neuroplasticity by taking time out of each day to consciously replace the negative tapes that we may have been playing with thoughts of happiness, love, and wisdom." And I would say to replace them with thoughts of how it is that love expresses as security, as peace and prosperity in our lives as well. So, as we wrestle with how it is that we can change our thinking, how do we clear out that storehouse that we've been stocking up in our mind? How do we forgive people and bring them back into our hearts? How do we divest ourselves of that erroneous thinking that is preventing us from the kingdom of God and experiencing our happiness right now? The Scarecrow has some examples and things that we can learn from him. First of all, he acknowledged that he was stuck. That was the first thing that he had to do. And when Edwene Gaines was here, she said she often hears when she teaches prosperity, "Oh, but Edwene, I'm on a fixed income." And she says, "But honey, if you're on a fixed income, you fixed it yourself." That's her response. That's that feeling of being stuck. We're stuck. So the first thing to do is acknowledge that. Then the second thing was to believe that maybe you could get unstuck if you only asked for help. When Dorothy came by, the Scarecrow thought, well, maybe I could just ask for help and then I can get unstuck. And Edwene was saying that we are only on a fixed income if we don't recognize that God is the source of all of our supply, not whatever place that fixed income is coming from. And so we can ask for help from whoever Dorothy is in our life, whoever, whether it's a minister, practitioner, a friend. And the next thing the Scarecrow did was start to imagine all the new possibilities he could do with that new brain, if he just got his new brain. He started picturing all these things that could happen. And Dorothy helps him down off the post, and what does he do? He flops to the ground. He flops around, and he has a hard time standing. And Jean Houston says that's the time that it takes us to get used to a new way of thinking. We might be trying to shift our thinking and feel like we're flopping around like the Scarecrow. We're having a hard time adjusting to a different way of seeing the world or imagining how we can create the peace and prosperity that we want to. So it takes some time, and it's that inner work, again, that helps us to get righted back up. And then she said that he initiates the next potent practice to awaken the brain, and that's movement. He starts dancing and singing and cavorting around, and he's singing about all the things he could create if he only had a brain. So what would you like to sing about if you only had a brain? Well, what we know from the story is that the Scarecrow had that brain all along. And like I said in the beginning, we are thinking people. We have that brain. So we need to just start dancing and singing about what that good is that we want to bring into our lives. And last month, as I was reading the October Science of Mind magazine, I got my new mantra that I've been dancing and singing to and asking the board to join me in dancing and singing to, and that is more than enough. I am more than enough. I want to share this with you. Ernest Holmes talked about, again in here, this time it is from Living the Science of Mind. Did you ever stop to think that you are a spiritual and mental broadcasting station and that messages are going out from you in all directions, perhaps even while you're asleep. Messages which have an influence on your environment and the people around you. And since everything moves in circles, the messages you're broadcasting out come back to you. And then further in the same magazine, when they're talking about the law of circulation, he recognizes and says, I realize that transformation is always inviting me into a deeper realization or relationship with myself. This is based not on what I have or what I do, but based on the realization of who and what I have come here to be. And he says, for example, if I determine that more than enough is who I am, then everything I have and everything I do is influenced by that consciousness of more than enough. And this then becomes what I broadcast and attract out. And so for me, as I'm looking at creating security and prosperity, I'm shifting from I want this, that, and the other thing to I am more than enough. I have more than enough. Many wars are fought over the idea that there isn't enough. That there's not enough land, there's not enough believers, there's not enough resources. Imagine a world where we all believed, I am enough. I have more than enough. I'm going to pull a Sandy Scott and ask you to say that with me. I am more than enough.
I am more than enough.
I have more than enough.
I have more than enough.
Exactly. So I started off by saying that some of the things you hear from me this morning could make you squirm or a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm affirming that since we are thinkers, we can take a lot of those apparent contradictions and become that place through meditation and contemplation that we balance them in our lives. I'm on a fixed income and I have more than enough. I'm stuck and I'm free to change. I am alone and I belong. I am more than enough. The love expressing through me is more than enough, and that creates my security, my peace, and my prosperity. And so it is.